Hello and welcome once again to Intro to Computer Games and Simulations here at Lorain County Community College. I am Mike Substelny, your instructor this term, and we are now in week 2 of our adventure together. We will be once again this week in this textbook, Game Design Workshop. We are in Chapter 2 of either the first edition, second edition, or the third edition. They're all referring to the same chapter. Page numbers are a little bit different. And today we are going to be talking about the structure of games, wherein we shall investigate the question of what is a game? And we will not come up with a definitive answer. I'll warn you right now, because there are some games that have things that many other games do not. But we will find some structural elements, and we're going to discuss some terminology that we will use throughout the rest of the semester to describe games. So we all have a common language to describe games. All right. We're going to begin by comparing two games. Your book also does the same thing. It compares Go Fish with Quake. We are going to compare Cityville with chess for the moment and explore why are those both be called games. Must a game require a computer or a console? What do you think? No, there were games long before we had microprocessors. What about a ball or a deck of cards? Do you need those to have a game? No, a lot of games have balls and decks of cards, but we don't need them. Well then, what do you need to have a game? Must you have a point score? Must there be score kept in games? Yeah, the outcome of the game may not be a point score. There are ways to play chess, for example, without a point score. There are ways to play with a point score, but you can just have a winner at checkmate, and that's a perfectly valid way to play that game. Must a game have players? Ooh, wait a minute. Yes, 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 and yes. The purpose of any game is for the experience of the players. Or occasionally, in the case of spectator sports, also the experience of the spectators. But the players will have some experience. They will be amused and challenged by that experience, as we are going to explore today. Now, do other forms of entertainment do the same thing that games do, where their purpose is the experience of, well, their players? Let's look at non-player entertainment forms, for example, like films and music. Let's look at books. And let's look at art. With a few exceptions, the person consuming this, the person who's enjoying it, is completely, if not totally passive, or at least mostly passive, but usually they are totally passive. Game players, on the other hand, are active in what they're doing for their entertainment. They're not just sitting there watching it, listening to it, reading it. Players make decisions. They always make decisions in some kind of game. And the player skill affects the outcome of the game. A different player might achieve a different outcome under the same circumstances. Players also are invested in the outcome of the game. Players care whether they perform well or perform poorly, whether they win or they lose. And players in a game have objectives. Objectives are specific goals for the players. For example, in Plants vs. Zombies, very specifically, I think everyone is aware, as in most tower defense games, your goal is to protect your front porch as zombies come charging across your lawn using objects that are mostly plants. In Evil Clutches, you have a goal of rescuing babies while defeating as many demons as you can from that are being emitted by the boss, or In some of your versions of Evil Clutches, your goal is a little bit different. They've been kind of fun to play, I've got to say. Games also have outcomes. We used that word a few minutes ago. Let's talk about it. Checkmate in chess is an outcome of the game. That should be the eventual outcome of any game that is a winner or loser, although it is possible in that game to end in a draw. Movies also have outcomes. We're looking there at the outcome of, anybody recognize that? Early silent film, Battleship Potemkin. The outcome of the game is the glorious communists overthrow their oppressors and take the battleship onto freedom, and et cetera, et cetera. It's a tremendous communist propaganda film from the turn of the previous century. Other stories, Heart of Darkness, for example, by Joseph Conrad, a great novelette. Anybody familiar with that one? No? Okay. Well, then I won't tell you the outcome of that one. So they have outcomes. Now, does the movie viewer affect the outcome? Does the book reader affect the outcome? No matter how many times you watch Battleship Potemkin, the communists always overthrow their oppressors. No matter how many times you read Gulliver's Travels, Gulliver always ends up concluding that all humans are yahoos, if you're familiar with that story. Let's talk about games versus other types of stories where the players have some control over the outcome. And the outcomes are usually unequal. We're looking here at poker chips, I presume, where one player has significantly more chips than the other player at the conclusion of the game. And in games, that is usually, but not always, the case. We're going to hit an exception that your book doesn't cover at the end of this lecture. Games have procedures. Pay attention to this. This is an important word. Procedures are ways that players interact with the game. Any game you make will have procedures. Pressing buttons, throwing balls, moving pieces across a board, these are all procedures. All right, you can't quite read that, but working with the steering wheel, operating the joysticks, all of them are procedures. Tossing a football, catching a football, that's a procedure. Crossing a goal line, that's a procedure. All of those things are ways that a player interacts with your game. In console games, let's look at some procedures. Pushing those buttons, moving those joysticks. And procedures are unique to games. If you look at other forms of entertainment, like an audience of a film or a play or a concert or something like that, they really don't have any formal procedures defined in how they're supposed to interact with that. Now, you may think, wait a minute, Mike, I went to a murder mystery theater where they asked me to guess the killer at the end of the night after all the performers had performed. And I would say, yes, that was a play, but that was also a game. If it had that interaction with you, it's starting to become a game where you are invested in the outcome. All games have rules. All right? That is important. That is going to be on quizzes. That is going to be on final exams. And some of you are going to say, are going to make some kind of argument at some point that, oh no, there are games without rules. No, if it doesn't have any rules at all, you can't really play it. It's not a game. Within the context of a film, the film viewer doesn't have rules, and the same goes for books, plays, music, art, films, anything. The observer doesn't have rules. They have to obey within the context of the movie. Yes, if you're in a theater, there are probably theater rules to obey. If you're in a concert hall, there are probably concert hall rules to obey. But there are no rules as to where your eyeballs are supposed to be looking at the movie screen or what you're supposed to be hearing as you're hearing the music. It is up to you to direct your attention as you are doing that. There's not a rule, whereas there are rules for how you interact with a game. There's a set of rules. That's the ranks of hands in straight poker. with nothing wild. That comes with just about every deck of bicycle playing cards. You'll see that set of rules. And there's a hand of, I guess that would be bridge, where certain cards have certain values under certain contexts. Bridge is kind of complicated. It's more like chess than it is like poker. More about rules. Okay, here's an example in Artemus Spaceship Bridge Simulator. You've got a spaceship with shields, and the enemies will shoot at you, and your shields will absorb damage up to their limits. And once they've reached their limits, guess what happens? The damage from your enemy weapons hurts your spaceship. That is one of the rules in that game, and actually that rule is used in lots of games. Here is a nifty game. This is one of those Bejeweled type games. I think that's Bejeweled Blitz, which has a set of rules where you make certain matches and you get points. There are procedures for interacting with this game. You click with your mouse pointer and move a jewel to make a match, and each of those procedures and how you interact is a rule. But there are some rules that are not procedures. All right, more about all games have rules. We have Boss Demon launches minion demons to try and kill you. You can launch fireballs to try and kill the demon. You launch the fireball by pressing the space bar. That is one of your procedures. The rule that the boss demon will randomly launch these minions, that the boss demon will randomly release babies, those are not procedures. That's just a rule that's built into the game. When you press that space bar, or whatever button you used when you wrote your version, you are creating a procedure for your players. All right? And so, of all the rules I just described, only the space bar was a procedure. Games have resources. They are items that a player may use that have some value that come from scarcity and utility. In this case, we're looking at from Darksiders, the Sword Chaos Eater. That is a very, very powerful item. That is a resource you have in the game. There are other resources in that game. In the case of a Hand of Bridge, I can see I've got a long and strong suit of hearts here that is a resource, and each one of those cards is a part of that resource for me in playing that game. All right, and games have boundaries. Even open world games have boundaries. There is an end to this world. Once you set down that game controller and look away from your television screen, you have reached the boundary of this so-called open world. Sometimes it's easy to see the boundaries. This is a sector in Artemus Spaceship Bridge Simulator. Nothing can go beyond the edges of this map in this game. That's just one of the boundaries that exists in this game. There's also a vertical boundary where things can't go above or below certain planes in that game. And those are obvious boundaries. Games may have less obvious boundaries, like in this hand of cards, we'll say it's Bridge, where there's this social convention: I will keep playing this game until it reaches its conclusion. That is one of the boundaries of that sort of game. And you can see there are other boundaries. You might say the card table is a sort of a boundary. There is a highest possible card, a lowest possible card, trump cards, things like that. They're all boundaries in their own ways. Boundaries exist, you can think of in sports. At the edge of most playing fields, there's some kind of boundary where you can't play beyond that boundary. And also, there are boundaries that are defined in rules within the playing field. In the case of basketball, we've got this three-point line, where a shot taken from beyond the three-point line is worth 3 points. And that is a rule. A shot taken within the three-point line is worth 2 points. That is a rule. And so all of these boundaries are rules. But not all rules are boundaries. There are plenty of rules about fouls and things like that, or the number of points that you get when the ball goes through the hoop. That has nothing to do with the boundary. Do we have a question?
Is when, like in a game of spades, for example, the rule being a boundary is that you can't play spades until they're broken?
You can't play spades until they're broken.
In a game of spades, the
Oh.
someone is.
Yes, okay. I would say once you've crossed that boundary, a rule is invoked. I would say that's a boundary, kind of like that. I would go along with that. Another thing about games. All games have conflict. Here is baseball, where players performing against each other in real time is the form of conflict. That's kind of obvious to everyone. You've probably experienced that. Well, a little bit different. In a video game, this is Koala Brait, a game you'll be making in a few weeks in this class. In this case, the players are performing against a deadly maze, and what you're seeing is a koala bear exploding and dying a horrible, violent death in this case, because the maze is pretty dangerous in that game. And your job is to perform against that maze as the player. But here's another type of conflict in a computer game. This is Car Town that you can play on Facebook, where the players are performing against each other, but it's not in real time. It's asynchronously. Somebody drove in a race some hours or days ago and challenged me to beat them in that race, and you can get challenges like this in all kinds of online games these days, where you're challenged to perform against each other asynchronously. Different form of conflict, but the game has some sort of conflict. Games will always offer a challenge. Here's a game we're going to be starting today in class. If you're ready to turn in your evil clutches, we've got Galactic Mail, where you're going to be flying a spaceship around to all these moons, and you must land on each moon to deliver the mail there, and you must not crash into an asteroid or the player will explode. And you don't have any weapons in that game as created, but I'm sure some of you will weaponize this game. It happens every year. We have another question? Yes, you can add enemies. That's all for the lab. Yes, customize it in any way you want. Add the most brutal, violent enemies you can think of. I would love it. Can't wait to see your games. Okay, games may offer dramatic elements. Not all games have these, but a lot of the games you like have dramatic elements. Like the premise in Railroad Empire is there is this continent just waiting to be spanned by railroad lines, and your job is to spread your rails out across the continent better and faster than your opponents do. That's the premise. Or characters, as in Red Dead Redemption, where you have these very dramatic, quirky, and serious characters that are out for blood and all kinds of other personal goals they may have. We'll get more into things like premise and characters in the coming weeks. And story, of course. We're looking here at Lego Star Wars, which has a very famous story that we're going to explore in more detail. Yes, Lego Star Wars follows the same Star Wars stories as the movie series does. And so it's quite a story. All right, that's it for this week. Or that's it. That leads us, into this week's online discussion, where we're going to talk about what is a game. I want your opinions, and I want you to voice in on each other's thoughts on what is a game and what is not a game. And yeah, I know somebody's going to think you're really deep and say, I think life is a game. And yeah, I've never heard that one before. Yeah. Let's talk about what is a game, and perhaps life is a game. And now we're going to get into the last thing that is not covered in your textbook, but it's important, especially to me and to those of us who are studying in college, and that is serious games and simulations. There are games that break some of the rules we just discussed there. That's because they have different purposes. A serious game, for example, the purpose may be educational, the purpose may be therapeutic. In the case here of, this is a therapeutic game, and if you go on to take the serious games and simulations class with me, you will get to play this series of games called Play Attention, where you strap on a brainwave helmet that I'm wearing in this picture, and you control these game characters using your brainwaves. And the purpose of that game is to give you biofeedback to better be able to control your level of concentration. It is supposed to be therapy for attention deficit disorder. And we have one of these sets in my office that we use in that class. That game is therapeutic. We haven't covered therapeutic in any of those purposes that we talked about before. And your book doesn't talk about that either. And moving on, there's an anatomy game too. And we can also have games that are experimental, like a simulation of a factory there where you would determine perhaps what size tank you need for that industrial process. Or this is a game we'll play later on in the semester where you get to rearrange the machines in a factory. It's a little flash game we whipped up here where you control the outcome and you experiment to try and get the most efficient layout of that factory you possibly can. You might imagine that that would be a very difficult thing to do in real life, to move around these machines within a factory. That would cost millions of dollars, and say, okay, let's see how efficient this is, and then move them around again. Let's see how efficient this is. But if you're just doing it digitally on a computer, not a lot of cost to that. All right, we're in the home stretch now. Here's another serious game. This is Ion Field, that was created by some programmers to use in our chemistry classes here. Online chemistry students can play this game to learn the octet rule in chemistry. And in this case, and in the case of many serious games, the outcomes don't need to be unequal. You may not have a winner and a loser in a serious game. The outcome may be simply to learn the rules. And once you are the master of the rules, you have achieved the outcome. Once you have mastered the octet rule in this game, you have achieved the outcome of Ion Field. And there are other games that are kind of semi-serious. Guitar Hero, Rock Band, DJ Hero, things like that. You actually can learn something about how music is made. And there are more serious versions of these where you actually use musical instruments. And there are people who have converted game controllers like the guitar and Guitar Hero to be musical instruments. That's possible to do, and in which case playing the game and mastering the game has taught you something, whether you liked it or not, that's applicable outside the game. And let's also talk about this. This is a new graph I made this year of the sales numbers from 2007. This is the last year where I could find comparable data. From these sources, the Entertainment Software Association gave us this $9.5 billion in entertainment game sales in the year 2007, whereas this article reconciling the serious games market size by Elaine Adroff, or Aladoff, in April of 2008, said that serious games market was $10.5 billion. So if you've been hearing that, yes, the entertainment games industry is bigger than the movie industry, bigger than the publishing industry, bigger than the music industry, yes, yes it is. And there is room to make some money in there. But there's even more room to make some money making educational serious games and simulations for places like Lorain County Community College. We use them. I showed you a couple of examples right there of games we commission programmers to make to use in our classes. But the military and the medical universes of our country use lots of educational games and simulations. And so that's a big number, and it just continues to go up and up. And now we are at the end of this week's lecture. Coming up next time, we are going to talk about what makes a good game. And I will see everybody in lab. I'm signing off now for Lorain County Community College's Intro to Computer Games and Simulations.